Well, to really get into this, we will now have a panel with 4 of the key stakeholders that are involved in the whole sector, and incredibly pleased to have on stage, back to give us more of an insight, Rohini Nilekani, representing Philanthropists. We have Vineet Rai of Avishkar and Intellicap Group, representing Impact Investor. We have Mutushi, representing Foundation, and then Deval Sangvi of Dasra, representing the intermediary. So I'll hand it over now. Huh?
In the middle.
And what is fabulous is we have a fantastic partner from Mint, Seema Chowdhury, who will facilitate the speak.
Good afternoon. I have been covering philanthropy and CSR for almost exactly a year. It's a newish field for me, and my ideas keep changing. The way I sort of look at things change every 6 months. At Mint, I was mandated to start with CSR, and as we sort of moved along, we looked at philanthropy in greater detail, and then suddenly the FCRA sort of problem started, and I was told, okay, look at the NGOs and find out what's happening with it. So we did a 10-part series on that. And then the activists got into trouble, and we said, okay, let's talk about activists and figure out what's happening to them. And we've been doing different things as we've sort of gone along. This report, when it came along, for me, it was less about numbers, which is what Bain and other people do all the time. It was more about ideas. So I wanted to sort of see how many of those ideas appeal to me. And I must say at the onset, giving and impact investing for me was a little sort of difficult for me to understand how the intersections can really happen. The other problem for me was when I was reading the report was 4 sets of people and all of them completely different from each other. How do you advise, or how do you tell them, or how do you sort of come up with suggestions which can work for them? So that's how I'd like to start with Mutushi and ask her, how did the idea to sort of define these 4 sets of people and get suggestions or interventions for them sort of come into being?
Thank you, Seema. So we started our conversation, we were in conversations with our partner institutions, given our presence in the country for a long time. And we recognized that, that something needed to be done about looking at the sector as a whole. Much of donor interest and much of institutional interest is focused on verticals. But what about philanthropy and impact investing as a whole, to look at what needs to be done to give a push to the sector? And that sort of started us thinking in terms of what is it that we can do. So when we spoke to individual experts, we heard that these are the gaps and this needs attention. But there wasn't really a coordinated discussion, and which is what we hope this report is going to seed and sort of lead to, is just a conversation on philanthropy, on impact investing as sectors, to say what needs to be done to get the story out there to the larger population groups and to people, to say this is what we need to do now.
So how exactly are you defining giving or philanthropic giving versus impact investing? What are your sort of key sort of ideas there?
There are other experts in this panel, but giving is something I think the way we ended up defining was philanthropy, traditional philanthropy, where you are providing support in the form of money, effort, time, in terms of making sure that for the welfare of the group that you're talking about without seeking a personal return. Very broadly spoken, I think that's how we saw. Impact investing, we sort of ended up saying that are there market sustainable models available which could serve the requirements of the bottom of the pyramid population groups per se. And given our interest in terms of looking at finding resources for development, we thought of these as different instruments to reach that point.
Rohini, what do you think? Do you think they can ever intersect? Aren't these 2 completely different ideas?
Well, I think in India, my friend Vineet
among others, have been trying to make that into a more less diverse area, in the sense trying to bring these two things together. We've had many discussions on this, but my feeling is that yes, there are certain public services that markets can provide, if not to the very bottom of the population, at least to the population with some ability to pay. And in a country where the government is not able to deliver those services, and these are services, the nature of which prevents them from being delivered by, say, typical NGOs. So there has developed an interesting space for markets to play in the social sector in India. But actually, Matushi, there is a whole group of impact investors who are not even expecting financial returns to themselves. They're expecting financial sustainability in the business model of the social service, but it's still patient capital like any other philanthropic capital which gets reinvested, which to me is interesting, because then the investor has taken greed off the table. And miracles happen when you take greed off the table, according to me, especially when it comes to development.
Vineet, would you?
Yeah. So I think Rohini has a point, and I think the definition part was done by Matushi. I don't have much disagreement with that. The philosophical angle was brought by Rohini. So I think giving and a part of impact investing is where greed has been taken off the table, and there is a part of impact investing where we are trying to make people understand how to manage greed. Then there is greed, which is the mainstream capital markets. Now, there are two kinds of people here from the impact investing side. We are some of those who are actually given away greed, and we are trying to make them a little greedy. And there are some who are actually very greedy, and we are trying to compromise their greed. So essentially, because of that very tricky position, impact investing gets kicked from both sides, but we have the opportunity to actually build a bigger sector. But from a very philosophical perspective, what I see impact investing is a very small subset of giving, and also a very small inconsequential subset of building businesses. One of the reasons why it exists is because the whole idea of philanthropy or giving is finite. And when we started off in 2000, 2001, the idea was that there are some things that are being done by NGOs can actually be done more efficiently and in a sustainable way, and most of these interventions required significantly larger capital than giving could actually contribute. And if you can do that, what you have done is you have released giving from some of the obligations and helped them divert their attention to problems that cannot be resolved. So if you see...
But giving is never an obligation, is it, Rohini?
No, but those who have actually taken up that obligation. So it's not really an obligation, but if you see the problem as a big problem of poverty, a big problem of malnutrition. Now, what business model can solve malnutrition? But if you're doing microfinance with your giving and not doing malnutrition, if I can create a sustainable model for microfinance, then the person who is giving away that money for microfinance can divert it to malnutrition, because there is no way in the world a business model will solve the malnutrition problem. At that point of time, that's what my thinking. Now there are people in impact investing who are thinking they can fight malnutrition as well. So this is actually a continuum, and things keep changing, and the voices will keep going up and down. But really the idea of impact investing was to do these two things.
So between giving and impact investing, considering the way we are sort of approaching startups or we are approaching social entrepreneurship in this country, is it going to get much more of a push here? Because it seems more exciting and it's more about, we'll give you something, but we'll get something back in return and we'll solve a problem alongside.
Well, so the startup is actually, the distinction is very simple. Startups are basically any business. So again, impact investing startup or social enterprise startup will be a subset of that. A classical startup, which is interesting for an investor, is actually something which has a very strong ecosystem. Let's say e-commerce, IT assisted, IT technology, software, medical areas, etc., wherever you are actually trying to build something within a certain ecosystem. Now you take up a challenge to do something which doesn't fall into the classical investing thought process, wherein you are actually having a client who has such a small wallet that whatever you do, providing the product at the right offer is going to be a challenge. Then it becomes a social enterprise. So the real difference is if you are making for a product for a person who has the money and has to make a choice, versus making a product for a person who has such a limited amount of money that making a product for that person is not lucrative commercially. And therefore you need to be very innovative and very different. And I think it's a very simple way of defining. Of course, there are further nuances to this. But if you want to look at a general difference between distinction, and therefore the government is struggling to make a distinction between social enterprise and startups. And one of the reasons why CSR is not allowed to actually support social enterprise.
Rohini, I was looking at the broad recommendations that the report makes, and one of the things that for impact investing and for giving, what they talk about is more information, more interaction with media, more stories out there. Do you think we can really make that, media can really make that much of an impact?
I think so, because first of all, I think the media, perhaps a lot of underreporting on stories that need to be told. Because the media has decided that readers like to read only some kinds of things. And I don't think they test readers like us enough. I think they need to test readers. How many people think that you want to know about the other side of life as well in the media? Be honest, come on, keep your hands down if you don't want to hear. See, there you go. So the media is probably not doing enough to tell us what on earth is happening to the rest of India.
But do you only want to hear good stories, all positive stuff, or do you want us to tell you all about when impact investing ventures fail, when CSR guys don't want to give us the information we are asking for? Is that the kind of information you also want?
Yes.
David, after Rohini.
No, just a point. Of course, we want the torchlight shone. That's what media is supposed to do, to shine the light where we can't go, so that we can see and make smart choices, whether when we vote or whether when we spend money. So certainly the media can do more of that.
What do you say, David?
No, I think media in a Mint newspaper, I think, has done a phenomenal job in that front for many, many years now, reporting on philanthropy. In fact, I remember when the Bain study first came out, the Indian Philanthropy Report they did a few years ago, which was the first one of its kind in this country. Bain, Mint, and others actually started covering the topic on philanthropy. And I think there's a huge sort of role that media has to play in mainstreaming any topic, whether it's impact investing or philanthropy. And I think more importantly, as Rohini just suggested, it's not just the successes because then it's biased media, which we have enough of in our country, but more importantly, I think it's what are the challenges. And to give an example, one of the organizations that we've been supporting, Sneha, they were in the New York Times in 2012 talking about failures. And that's something that most nonprofits, impact investors, as well as social businesses don't articulate enough, because through failures we have learnings. And so to have an article in the New York Times, unfortunately not in the Indian press, but in the New York Times from an organization called Sneha that looks at malnutrition in the slums of Mumbai and talking about different models and theories of change and what their learnings were in sharing it, that's exactly what media needs to do, because not everyone can come to platforms like this to hear firsthand of what's going on the ground.
Another suggestion or another intervention that the report makes is it talks about improving the culture of giving, whether it's for the high, sort of the rich or the middle class or retail givers, as they say. I'd like each one of you to tell me one idea that you've heard of or something that you think can really boost giving. And it can't just be panels like this. How do we why don't we start with you, David?
Sure. I mean, I think, again, moving beyond panels
and not
like
media.
this.
Apart from media and this thing, what else can we do?
I think the transparency of, again, communicating what's happening. So online platforms, for example, in the US, there's a group called Kiva that's done amazing work, and a similar group in India called Malap, in fact, that does microfinance online. And so it allows, again, greater accessibility for those who want to give appropriately. This in itself is actually more impact investing because there is a return that is given back to the investor, but sort of democratizing how you give effectively. So Kiva and Malap have done that. We have groups in India called Keto and others that are doing crowdsourcing on the nonprofit side as well, Global Giving, Give India, and others. So I think that just making more information transparent through the internet and enabling transactions to actually transpire from the internet is a critical piece to democratizing sort of educated investing or giving in this country.
Vineet?
I think taking the same point from Devil's side, I think the big challenge is if you have rich people, they have their own, so the ultra-rich have actually family offices. There is a significant amount of capability there to make decisions. The challenge starts with people who have the money, but probably not the time to make the right decisions. And there they are either going by gut instincts, but once they actually go by the gut instinct, sign a check, and then don't get the kind of reports or the information, then they get challenged. So what do you do to make that client and then people further down? Because then there will be people who will coming up with a smaller amount, some people will do salary giving, etc. these people want their money to make a difference, and therefore needs to be continuously informed of what's going on, and that challenge needs to be addressed. So Give Foundation started way back in 2000, actually when Deval and I started, Venkat started around the same time as well. So what Give Foundation has done has been remarkable, and actually if more of that can be done, again on the very early stage equity side, a lot of us actually want to do it, but it's a very expensive way to do it. If you can have strong technology platforms that can allow disintermediation of cost, there is a significant cost right now, and allow people, now again Securities and Exchange Board will come into play, and so you need to then create a very significant amount of advocacy power behind that. And then somebody who understands what kind of frauds may happen because of this. Because really, as you rightly pointed out, you're talking about failures. I have burned my fingers and hands and legs in the microfinance crisis. A lot of it actually has been massively challenged. Once the media went after it, there was really nothing to save us. And it's almost impossible. How the hell can you actually make poor people commit suicide? Even if whether you defend it or not defend it, you are still guilty. So I think the challenges are, how do you actually position the right information? For example, the valuations. Suddenly, I'm just talking from making a mainstream example, information about valuation can create significant value, and then you suddenly start talking about depressing valuation. What it does on the ground is it actually creates suddenly a large number of entrepreneurs who want very large valuations, and suddenly have a lot of entrepreneurs who walk away from being an entrepreneur once you start writing the Flipkart's valuation drained by Morgan Stanley. Now, most people will not understand why Morgan Stanley paid 15 billion and why it made it 11 billion. But they will start making decisions that Flipkart is going to shut down. And what my challenge has been, that's a similar kind of information when it starts going in, the uneducated population then starts taking uneducated decisions. And I think if I have any advice for the media, please do not sensationalize either the good or the bad.
That was not advice for the media. That was how to increase giving.
Yeah. No, I'm actually just leaving one extra part which you didn't ask.
Well, I would focus on a couple of things. One is, I think, having events like the Dan Utsav. I mean, it gets up mentioned in the report as well. Just in terms of its contribution to creating that awareness across various sets of stakeholders as to what could they, constructively do to be able to participate in the country's development. I think it's a very, very powerful tool, and I think it has a much higher reach than what it has currently attained at the moment. And I think I would certainly sort of support events like that, where you just basically don't necessarily need to monetize or don't necessarily look at the value of what you're doing, but just the whole act of giving per se by itself. The second area is that I would like to focus on is just getting more research out into the ecosystem. Research which is something, the research findings that can be easily explained to people outside the sector. I have huge difficulty explaining what we do at times to people who have been completely in the corporate sector. I think we need them as well, very much so. And just as the ecosystem provides for presence for work on philanthropy, work on issues, you need a lot of communication, a lot of understanding of each other's roles in the sector, and which doesn't happen at the moment. I would definitely argue for that.
What about you, Rohini?
Yeah, I think everyone has made very sensible points. I think we need, as an ultra high net worth UHNI, it sounds like some disease to me, but it is a disease of affluenza, they say. I think much more, I've said this before to you, Seema, there needs to be much more public pressure on the wealthy in India. I'm saying it, I need more public pressure on me as well. I'm not excluding myself. Wealth in this country has been allowed to be created at a runaway rate in the last 25 years, and that's good, but that wealth must be used more responsibly. So we must put public pressure on our wealthy to say, so what are you doing with that wealth? How are you giving it forward back to society? Is your having wealth, is it useful for us in society or not? And that is a role that media has to play, thinkers have to play, influencers have to play, and all of us have to ask, what on earth, what on earth is happening? When you do that and people who are giving start to talk more frankly about why they're giving, what they're giving, how they're giving, and share that more honestly and transparently, because I'll tell you, giving is a lot of fun. So you tell people that the joy that you're actually getting from that, you should share that. I think more of our wealthy should talk about that. I try to do so in my own way. And I think that will help more people to give. That's one. But at the lower end, we have to celebrate the giving of ordinary people, because in India, people give all the time. And I think we must move them now on the continuum of just giving, almost reflexively, they just give, but giving a little more strategically. For that, you need platforms at smaller levels across different parts of the country where you can share, where you can learn, and I think Dasra does a lot of that sort of stuff. We need much more of that to happen. Celebrate the giving of ordinary people and nag the rich into giving more.
Okay. CSR, do you really think that social impact investing or social entrepreneurship should be brought into the ambit? I'm going to pose it to both of you. What do you think?
Well, I think there is a challenge. How do you actually distinguish between whether the CSR is being, in the guise of CSR, you have started creating value or wealth for yourself. And we don't have any certification. There is no certification mechanism. There's very early stage discussions around how do you actually distinguish between a company that is actually genuinely there only to make money, even though it is serving the poor, but just wants to make money. And by the way, you will be surprised. If you go to Europe and US, people carry their badge of being social entrepreneur on their chest. In India, most people will run away from that badge. And you can go to the most successful entrepreneur in this space, they will say they don't want to be classified as social entrepreneur, because it happened in microfinance. The moment you start making money, you will be hanged upside down and burned. So the challenge is actually, and this is a challenge, so somebody has to consciously decide whether he wants to be persecuted or not. And if you are going to be persecuted because you are doing something good, then you need to...
And making money with it.
And making money at the same time. Then you must build safeguards for yourself, which requires that you need to take certification, you need to actually create safeguards that go beyond what your audits right now provide. And I think that's really the challenge.
Deva?
No, I agree completely. I think with the Corporate Social Responsibility Act, while it's giving a large amount of capital into the sector, I think, again, those same individuals, who many of them have 3 full-time jobs in PR, communications, and HR, now are looking at grant giving at a very large level. They themselves don't have access to this information or time or resources. So they're just like any other uninformed investor, they can fall into that same category, going after sort of the wrong entrepreneur, then risking the reputation of their company as well as everything else that the impact investing sector has been building over time. So I think there just needs to be a lot more information, hopefully some self-regulation, both from the nonprofits and the social businesses as well as the impact investors. And I think even in microfinance, and I think Vineet brings this up quite a bit, and both of us see Vijay Mahajan, for example, a hero in microfinance, and he was one of the few individuals who took a step back about 7, 8 years ago to say it's not about repayment of loans, but it's about changing the economic status of women. And he instituted various other programs to ensure that that was happening, because it was honestly, for those of you, and I apologize, it wasn't for the multinational banks to get more money in terms of their interest. It was actually to help women in rural India, which is why Mr. Mahajan started this initiative. And so I think for the two of us and many of us in this sort of sector, I think our belief is impacting communities on the ground to the best of their ability. Some of them may have the ability to pay capital for those services. Some of them may not. And I think it's up to us as investors or funders to realize where we diversify our own allocations, and perhaps doing a little of all of these areas, but not necessarily bridging or creating these artificial demands, because when it was Venkat from Give India, Vineet, or myself starting around the same time, we all had the same vision and mission. We just realized we had different skills and approaches to move people out of poverty faster. And I think it's the combination of these 3 solutions that are really creating impact in the country today.
Coming to the small and sort of person who's giving money, do you think an NGO accreditation list or something where you know that if I give money to this particular kind of NGO which has been recognized by whichever standards are set, is that going to encourage more sort of small givers to come ahead and give?
Yeah, I'm sure Matushi can address that more, but we've been saying that for the last few years, that we need many ecosystem organizations that bridge and again, Dasra, Give India, so many are doing that. CAP to begin with, and many others have been doing that. We obviously need more, because we know people want to give, they don't know whom to give to, they don't know, that trust element is missing. You need to be able to build trust between the giver and the receiver. I think those institutions are still not enough. They need to grow. The sector needs to grow much faster and professionalize quickly. But for that, you need to also be able to draw in good professionals into the sector. And how do you do that? It's almost chicken and egg. So maybe Mautushi can, we had that conversation, maybe you can address that. I'm not taking over your role yet. That's okay.
No, I think there is definitely need for more. We're still at a very early stage with respect to providing platforms, and that is something the study comes back to tell us very clearly that, having, number one, lack of credible channels to give, and secondly, lack of knowledge on the channels that exist as of today. So there is much more that needs to be done. Accreditation, I think, in terms of getting to know in the NGOs on the other side, I think that has a major role to play. I think there was been a lot of conversation about what would accreditation really mean. Does it mean that if we use the same type of metrics that gets used in a corporate framework or a business framework, or do we need separate types for this particular sector per se? And there has been a lot of discussion to say that maybe not everything that goes for the business model will apply here. You would need to define some metrics which sort of talk about case studies, the contexts in which these NGOs are working, which are quite different from that of, you can't really mainstream or sort of can't take a model to work everywhere. So you need to be more specific about where we are going. But having platforms, giving that information to to a potential giver, I think can phenomenally change the scale of the game.
Okay, I think I'd like to open it if anybody has any questions for anybody at the panel. Anything?
Thanks. This has been a really great discussion. One question, and it's really triggered by Vineet's, I think, point about microfinance and the risks associated with that. I think we see philanthropy as a one-directional thing. It's about saying, how do we encourage more people to give for a good cause? What are your thoughts about the risks that are associated with that growing quantum of resources that will be unleashed or are being unleashed on the social sector?
I can take a crack at it, unless was it for Vineet? Or? Yeah, I think the risk is very, very high. And I think, again, that's why transparent data and some sort of platforms and accreditation is so critical. I mean, I think in 2009, when Dasra actually launched what's now called Dasra Philanthropy Week, back then we just thought it was going to be a one-day gathering. And now it's really turned into a week. The really goal for us was to share the practices and experiences and mistakes we and the various organizations that we were working with had for over a decade, and bring that to forums like this, because our concern was that the new wealth that was being created in this country, and a lot of foundations were being set up around 2009, 10, and 11. How do we share these experiences and help educating a group of philanthropists so they don't make the same mistakes? Because our biggest fear, honestly, was we're going to wake up one day with one of these individuals saying, oh, all NGOs are corrupt, you shouldn't fund them. I gave X amount of rupees to one organization, they ran away with it. And realistically, it was the lack of their due diligence process, which is probably what spent that 1 lakh or 5 lakhs or whatever to sort of go in the wrong direction, versus all of a sudden blanketing every nonprofit organization in the country to be inaccurate or ineffectual. And I think this is really where combinations of platforms like this are required, because, I mean, just the Huron list of philanthropy, for example, stated last year alone, 5 philanthropists, these are individuals in our country, 2015, gave 33,000 crores away. 5 individuals. The amount of money that's coming through CSR, as you guys know, is estimated at 20,000 crores a year. And so when you start looking at these numbers, if these individuals are not making intelligent decisions, whether it's in philanthropy or impact investing, honestly, the hard work that many of us have put towards this sector will all go to waste overnight. And to a certain extent, some of these things happened in microfinance in 2009.
Mr. Vijay Mahajan, we all admire as mentor and a hero. Actually, his organization is bankrupt, zero. And that's the consequence. A man who gave all his life away in building this country, was the most responsible guy, is the man who is completely bankrupt today. Now that's the consequence, and that's the consequence that we are all carrying on our shoulders. That's a cross. That's why I'm actually saying there is a reason why people don't want to be called social entrepreneur in this country, because when we go after it with a passion that we want to actually completely finish them. And that really is a challenge. So the risk is very high. In fact, I am actually considered one of those guys who have raised the largest amount of money in impact investing. I do the maximum amount of NT sale. I actually go and tell people this is a challenge, there is no money is coming. Part of the reason is celebrating impact investing when it is still actually literally crawling on the ground, and taking it to that stratosphere will actually bring in wrong kind of investors with wrong expectations. We actually receive continuously people asking us, have you already given 20% returns in dollar terms outside? Well, no private equity in India has actually given 20% dollar returns, so how the hell will I give? And most of them actually want us to give 20% dollar returns. It's not that it's not possible, it's just that it is going to be a painstakingly long process. And if we do that, the kind of investors we'll bring in would not agree to any change in strategy at any point of time, and that's the real challenge.
But I think, Vineet, also we learned a lot in the microfinance crisis, and I think we have talked about this. Those lessons need to be encapsulated and shared very quickly so that future, because people are looking to invest in other things, public services, where usually the state was doing that role, in water, in health, in housing, in education, in some other essential service, energy. We don't want that to happen in these services again, because apart from my dear friend Vijay Mahajan who suffered, a lot of other poor people suffered. At the altar of profit maximum. I mean, I have nothing against profits, believe me, but there were perverse incentives in that whole process. We can't let that happen again. So that is the danger of a lot of money chasing this sector. The other danger I do want to say is sometimes all of us who have wealth, I think we mistakenly believe that it's got something to do with our own greatness. Okay. And the kind of relationships that we develop with the people that we give to, the causes that we give to, become too much that of patronage rather than partnership. And I think this is a real danger, because donor-driven programs that we know or we think are in the interest of the poor may not be. And I think that's a real danger of a lot of money sloshing around, more in self-interest than in the real interest of changing the structure of power in society, of making people capable of finding their own solutions. And I think that is a real danger of having money sloshing around in the development sector. And I think it's up to us to be self-aware. Every evening, look in the mirror and say, are you that great after all?
Any other question?
Yeah.
Sorry, after that.
Mrs. Neelkani, you brought out a very good point that people do it for them, for thinking that they have a solution and for their greatness. But one thing I wanted to point out, is it not possible that a good religious trust can also cooperate with the giving away money, because a lot of people give, like Ramakrishna Mission Trust or a good church trust. They do anyway a very good social service, and cannot that be combined with somebody like organization like personal giving, corporate giving and all that, and do a good social work in the especially with the women and education.
Let me say it quickly, and I'm sure all of you have something. Let me say what I believe. I think the religious institutions, the faith-based institutions in India do remarkable alleviation work. Remarkable. We don't even know. Millions of temples, langars, mosques, churches, they do so much to alleviate hunger, shelter, food, all those kinds of education, scholarships, everything like that. But I don't think it is neither the job of religious institutions, nor is it their, their creed to do what I'm talking about, is to go to root causes, to find out why there is structural imbalance in equity, why are there equity imbalances in society. I don't think religious institutions do that. I think it is up to us to look at a situation, whether it's water or health or anything, find out what is happening, why some people have water, why we are not looking at sustainability of water resources. I don't think religious institutions are equipped to do that. And I think that job must be left to the kind of activism that we are seeing in this room, to go behind the scene and not just alleviate, but absolutely create new structures where there can be reduced inequity and more sustainability.
You want to answer that?
I can only say that in the impact investing space, the church-based investing is pretty significant actually. And the Islamic investing is very small, but still moving in. So I don't know about the Hindus, but, but these two capital is pretty significant actually.
I think the Vatican also invests heavily
well,
in the social
yes,
sector.
very large.
I'm Jagdish Acharya, work for Asian Paints. Rohini, you very nicely alluded to something what I would call small is beautiful in the beginning of your speech. And this is what I want to ask the panel. Is scale, especially in the context of impact investing, scale a vitiating factor or it's an enabling factor? If it is, if there are small NGOs doing very well where impact is easily seen, but investment is not returned, then what are the enabling features that we can look at to make them come out from their more philanthropic positions to a social enterprise positions? Is that something we should consider, especially when there are so many NGOs?
So I'm not really the most competent guy to speak on the NGOs, so I'll leave it for Deval to answer that. But if you are not an NGO or a small enterprise, Shumita Ghosh is actually going to get Nari Shakti Puraskar on March 8 by President of India. So she was my first NGO converted enterprise investment. She was running 800 women, or I think 80 women institution at that time, 2006. And she came asking, so her total turnover was 23 lakhs. And she came looking to asking for some small money from me at that time. My capability was also to give 25, 30 lakhs. So she came and she said that, why don't you give this money as a grant? I said, well, that's not what I can do. I can actually give you as equity. And she really cursed me and went back. And while parting, we had a discussion. I told her that go back and search. If I give you 50 lakh, would you be able to, what is it that you want? She said, there is a woman knocking on my door looking for an employment every day. So I said, if you become for profit and if you get my money, would you be able to change that growth line? So she went back. She was completely unconvinced. She went back. 6 months later, she called and she said, I think I'm actually ready to take your money. So I gave her 23 lakhs. I took 23% ownership in her company. And then 4 years later, she reached 8 crores. Okay, that's the scale that's part of it.
We need to tell them what the institution does.
Yeah, so basically she lives in Bikaner and she actually has 800, all the women who are basically making artisans. So this is actually supplied to Fab India. So anything you buy in Fab India is actually not made by Fab India. It comes from all across India by institutions and NGOs who make it. So these are people who work at the grassroots. They work with the poorest of poor, work across the Pakistan border on the Rajasthan side. And so basically she didn't want to take ownership. So the for-profit agreement that we had is all the women who actually live on the Pakistan border are the shareholder in that company. And I was the other shareholder. And those women, number of women kept growing. And so they became, so I think today there are 1,000 odd women who are the owner of that company. And we have sold our stake, made 39% return. The challenge that I learned when I was actually making my fundraise for the new fund, I was raising a $100 million fund, all my investors trooped there and came with tears in their eyes and said, Vineet, we want you to do this. And in my document, I wrote and said, I will never do this. And they were quite shocked. They said, you took us all the way, you showed what you're doing, and then you are saying you're not doing. Because I said, I can never generate 20% dollar return doing this. And you guys want 20% dollar return. That's the document you are asking me to sign. So I will not do this. But I took you there to show you what you are making me not do. The argument that I was trying to make there, and I still continue to make, there are different kinds of impact investors. And right now, there is only one breed. We are trying to make the largest enterprise and do an IPO. That's essentially what we are trying to do. There's nothing wrong with it, but there are a large number of people who don't want to scale. They want to run small institutions and want to make an impact. And we don't have institutional mechanism. Actually, venture capital is a very poor model to do impact investing. But unfortunately, I don't have any other option to. So if I have to actually find an appeal to MacArthur, then I would want their capital to go and create a fairly significant educational drive to change the structure of this 220, 10-year or 8-year model structure that we have as venture capital, which is what only people understand. Now, how do you educate JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, KFW, IFC, etc., to rethink this? It's very, very difficult. But that's where really significant money can go in to make a difference.
These
are the challenges.
Vineet's own Occupy Wall Street model.
No, I was just going to answer in that too. I think it's depending the model, and I think again, when we talked about this particular intervention, which was livelihood-based, you can get some sort of equity or debt. If you're actually talking about, for example, rescuing women or children who've been trafficked for the sex trade, there is not a business model in the world to make that happen or sustainable. And so I think it's realizing what change or impact are you trying to create, and then within that, just like you do in an investor, if you invest in certain sectors, you know your returns will be X. You have different metrics of EBITDAs, et cetera. In the same way in other sectors, you may have a difference in terms of valuations. The same thing happens here. So I think for you as a funder, you have to think about where do you want to first of all play, i.e. what impact do you want to create, and then figure out who are the entrepreneurs in that space and what is the most appropriate type of capital you can provide that entrepreneur. It could be grant-based, it could be debt-based, it could be equity-based, it could be non-convertible debentures, as other groups have now realized. But I think that's really the target, and to all of a sudden assume that all of a sudden, if you have 100 small NGOs, the second they become equity-based, they're going to be scalable is not the right answer at all. And I don't think Vineet or anyone, for that matter, wants to see that sort of happen going forward.
To learn and scale up. What do we do to help them? How do we minimize the marginalization that is likely to happen in the future? And how do we maximize opportunities for those who are doing excellently, but may not be visible or may not have the opportunities that some of us enjoy?
Yeah, no, on the nonprofit side, I think there's really some phenomenal groups in our country that work with small and medium-sized organizations. Smita, if you could maybe stand up. Smita and her partner Jyoti run a phenomenal organization called Drishti, which works with small and medium-sized organizations across the country. There's another group called Caring Friends, again based in Mumbai, that does similar work. On the non-profit side, there's a group called Unlimited India, for example, based here in Mumbai that has branches now across the country that works specifically with startups, both for-profit and non-profit. And so I think the great thing about this country is you have different players at different stages.
Okay,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very good because it allows people, again, it's like shining the torch, right? You're bringing in sunlight into the space. And once people understand these things, the quality of the demand on the supply side goes up very sharply when they are empowered with information. And then you don't need to do much. People gather together to push the system to deliver. So I think that's very innovative. Thank you.
Any other question? Yeah.
There's an observation and a question, and it applies to anyone on the panel. The observation is I'm seeing a structural challenge to impact giving and the scale it can create. And the anecdote is in the for-profit world that even sectors where we invest as investors in healthcare and education that are socially sensitive, the scale challenge is solely because of lack of middle-level managers. And this is alluding in some ways to what the gentleman here mentioned. There's enough money coming. The money will scale 100-fold. I don't have much of a doubt in the next few years you will see a reasonable scale. But the managers are not there. And this applies not only to the organizations that need to scale, but even Dasra at some level, right? If Dasra needed to add 20 really smart mid-30s managers, it's not easy. In fact, it's extremely difficult. So what's your view on that? Do you see this as a structural issue? And if yes, then what do you think, not a solution, but at least what could be an opening thought?
I won't mind taking that. So have you thought why microfinance scaled actually? And there is an answer there. Microfinance scaled not because we could find those mid-managers, but because banking sector supplied those managers. That's the amazing part of it. Because the banking sector in India was very large, a large number of people from the banking sector actually moved when money started coming in. So what happened in education and health, which is actually a challenge for us as well, and it's a challenge for Deval and me as well, to find people who are capable, if you're trying to grow from 10 to 20 and 20 to 50 and 50 to 100. But really, this is also a game of time. I mean, how much time have you spent and what kind of celebrity status you have given to these people? Because ultimately, there is no dearth of people. India has 1.3 billion people, and I used to ask people to take 90% salary cut to join. So one of my colleagues came and said, what do you think? This is not going to survive. This company will shut down. And so I said, so why do you think that? And he said, because I don't believe people will keep taking 90% salary cut. So I said, so how many people do you think we will be in the wildest of dreams? So he said, 1,000 people. I said, using 1.3 billion and 7 billion worldwide, we can't find 1,000 people at that. And frankly, I have found, we have reached at 1,900. So Avishkar and Telecap group, we are at 1,900 people now. And we have found people. So I don't think so it's that difficult. It's difficult. So it takes time.
And I think the challenges on the giving side are very real in terms of capacity across various levels. And we sort of come across that quite frequently, and that's an area that definitely needs much more support. It came through during the research as well in terms of finding different, making sure that you have professional help available for these NGOs to be able to strategize, to do higher levels of professional management, looking at monitoring, impact measurement, the various aspects. You get a lot of passion there, but how do you convert that passion to, direct that passion to areas that would start speaking to some of the other sets of stakeholders? That is, I think, the real challenge.
But it is a structural issue. You know, all my mentors and all the people in the 70s, they were working in the non-profit sector for a pittance. They were doing it out of passion and commitment. I think today's young people who are coming into the sector are not going to be willing to do that. And it is a problem. How do we not look at everything in monetary terms? And it sounds very strange coming from me, but I don't mean to be facetious. How do we celebrate that you get a lot more non-monetary benefits from being in this sector? I think more stories need to be shared. People want to come in, but there's been a lot of distortion. Some of the bigger foundations, we pay good salaries, we pay some pay top dollar. But you know, in a corporation, if you don't meet your sales targets, you'll be looking for another job. How do you do the same in this sector? There are real issues. How do I judge the impact of people's work? It's very, very hard, and we have to be able to figure out some middle ground between monetary compensation and something else. So
No.
it is a structural issue.
I also think, though, that there's a variety of capacity building programs that now exist. For example, last year, in fact, at Dust for Philanthropy, we launched and announced a program with the Harvard Business School to train CSR representatives, NGO leaders and government officials to start working together. We had Professor Kasturi Rangan come down and do a 5-day course in October and December with 65 individuals coming from, like I said, corporate foundations, CSR, NGOs, as well as government, to try to work closer together. Thus was also launched philanthropy education programs, where we have philanthropists coming together now and learning how to give more effectively. And for 8 years, we've been running the Dust for Social Impact programs, which looked at leaders of social organizations, enabling them, both social businesses as well as NGOs, to think about scale and structure in a more effective manner. And so, as you're a philanthropist in this room, many times we want to sort of ensure that every rupee goes to the end beneficiary, not taking a step back, for example, and realizing there are things, for example, that a funder of ours based in Germany, Robert Bosch Stiftung, supports, which is a leadership program that we run for social entrepreneurs. We just had the graduation on Wednesday. 32 organizations, cumulative annual budget in India, 600 crores. If you fund programs that you can have 32 organizations participate for 4 weeks throughout the year, you're influencing 600 crores of funding. I don't think you can make a better multiplier investment, but then you have to take a step back and not worry too much about attribution and contribution, but instead say this is what India needs to move 800 million people out of poverty. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about, is that number and what all we can do, again, collectively without our name and logo and all those other things required to make social change occur.
All right, I'd like to wrap up here. Thank you so much. I'm going back with lots of ideas, and hopefully I'll come up with better stories which are positive and negative and help you to sort of give more and think about the space. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.